absolutely for sure a good thing to remember is that everything works with oxygen at all times, and there is always lactate circulating in your body. If your first rep is at 32 kilometers per hour, then your next one is at 30, and then your next one is at 28, and then your next one is at 26. Granted, if the rest times are short enough, where a slower person that has a top speed of say 25 kilometers per hour, well, they might be able to do then 24 and then 23 and then 22. So on paper, it looks like, oh, they're maintaining their top speed better. Yeah, but they were just slow as fuck to begin with. So it doesn't
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter.
Welcome back to a brand new Rugby Muscle podcast. I'm joined once again for a second time by Sean Seale of Upside Strength. Sean, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
Really good. I'm glad we can reconnect again because I've been watching your YouTube videos recently and been following along with a lot of the podcasts, well, the podcasts that I can understand. And I've been really impressed. I've been really impressed by the stuff that you're putting out. I think we said last time that you came from a very non-traditional strength and conditioning background. Mm-hmm. So to see you really getting, and I've also come from a non-traditional strength and conditioning background. So it's cool to see how we can see things a little bit differently and sort of have the balls to sort of stand out and say, no, let's look at things a bit from a different perspective,
Yeah, I think it does have some advantages to start with a blank slate, so to speak, and maybe not to have all the baggage that you would usually have if you go through the usual curriculum, which I think is still fine, right? Because as long as you're ready to think critically and to question your own motives and your own thinking, then no matter what track you went through, either growing up or through your education, you're always going to be able to parse things out. I think that's probably the determining factor more than the background itself, I would say.
For sure, yeah. Critical thinking, you can get people, that's what I always say when you get a lot of people that say, oh, there's no point going to university at all. And then it's like, that's for some people, but then there are a lot of others that you need to go to university to understand even what critical thinking is. But
yeah, I think it does bring a lot to a lot of people. I think, I don't know. I'm the more I move forward, the more black and white statements just don't jive at all with me.
yes.
I guess that's a pretty absolute one, but I'll stand by it.
Yeah. It's terrible for marketing, though.
Well, I don't.
In a way.
Yeah, in a way it is, but in another way, I guess if you are just open about your own shortcomings and the things that you don't know, then you actually the follower base is there in part because of your honesty and the process that you're going through, rather than the shiny object that you might have put out that was kind of cut and dry and simple and easy, and here's my 30-day special whatever. But again, I think there's stuff for everybody, right? And there is very simple and even simplistic stuff that works great for some. I think the key is just to find whatever works for you, no matter what the framing might be.
Yeah, I think I touched on this with Kia before, and it's because I think it was when we were talking about the knees over toes guy, and it's just he just has a good system, and because things are black and white, and that's what people love. They love it. But for every and with most popular guys, there's so many, for every one person that's made terrific progress with them, there's probably hundreds that have just paid up, signed up, went for a week, and they just hated it or just fell off, and just were a victim. But I feel guilty with that sort of stuff, so I'm happy to have a similar sort of base where it's people that want to think critically, that want to not just be spoon-fed everything, because that stuff just stresses me out anyway if I have people that's what they want. So yeah, I think you're attracting the right crowd as well, mate.
I appreciate it. It's been nice having some positive feedback from the few people that follow me, and I guess I really, and I might have said that already last time, so sorry for those who listened to the previous one already if I'm repeating myself, but it really serves as a thinking platform for me. Like
Mm-hmm.
the presentations that I put together and the videos that I make is literally me talking and thinking out loud in a somewhat structured way, because it helps me figure things out. This is essentially how I learn. I found my way. My favorite way to learn is I interview people on my podcast. I talk to people who know way more shit than I do, and then I go dig into those concepts, whether it's through PubMed or other videos on YouTube, like YouTube University. That's my
Mm-hmm.
that's my
Mm-hmm.
university. I watch Khan Academy. Like today in the car, I was watching a Khan Academy on the lung and alveoli and gas exchange, because that's what I'm interested in right now. I haven't learned all that stuff. I never opened an anatomy book, even in my my coaching education, because all I did was challenge the CPT exam with the NSCA. So I read the book. I got the basics, but I never really was forced to learn all those things. So at the same time, it gives me some leeway to kind of go where I want with my thinking. At the same time, I also have to quote unquote pay my dues and go back and relearn the basics, or learn the basics that maybe I assumed to know, or but maybe I didn't. So it's an interesting process, and I find it really rewarding when I'm able to do it, and then again have the feedback of people who are interested. And I always encourage people to just point out maybe inaccuracies or things that are blatantly wrong, or obvious, that I probably miss. Because the more I move forward, and that's the same with the podcast, the more I think that we're going to get to much better places much quicker if we think collectively than if we just stick to our own one track. This is me, my thoughts, this is just what I think about. So I've actually been contemplating, when I invite people back on my podcast, what I want to do is pair them up at least 2 by 2, so that we have a bit more interaction between those different coaches, maybe different backgrounds, etc. But I feel like the conversation is always going to be, 1 + 1 = 3. Even if obviously an individual a lot of good stuff to the table and bring some value to the listeners. But I really think that when 2 people or more interact, you always come out with something more that you didn't go in with. And so the more I move forward, the more I really see that as something that at least I want to do more of, and I think more people would benefit from in general.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like, yeah, it's the same process for me, to be honest. Like every time I get back to the podcast, I learn more stuff, or or stuff just gets. Maybe it's not the new, like I'm not getting new books, but I'm reordering my library so that I can get more of an understanding, that to conceptualize it, to even just to help with my clients, or just to help with other people, and reframe it. And then I dig deeper into it as well, and I go down rabbit holes myself, and then I do the same thing. I actually learn. I have now the Rugby Muscle Academy, and what we're doing is both with skills, with everything to do with like rugby fitness, and just like a lot of personal development stuff as well. We just go. I just pick a thing and then go balls deep on it, and then I'm able to educate those guys, and then they give me feedback, and they'll say, "Oh, this works, but this wasn't quite for me," and then you reframe it, and it's like a continual process. Yeah, we do things very similar, so that's pretty cool. What's life been like at Upside Strength for this past year? Because it's just over a year ago or so that we first had you on. I think it was before this whole pandemic hit. So yeah, it's been an interesting year, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's been very interesting is definitely the word. So I had, I forget exactly the date that I was on the first time, but on January 31st of 2020, so just before the pandemic, I quit my other job that I had taken to transition back from, coming back from Canada with my family and going back to full-time coaching. So I started coaching full-time February 1st, 2020. I'm 95% sure I got COVID because I've never been that sick in my life. It was mid-February. My wife as well. My mom couldn't breathe for 3 weeks, but it wasn't even the thing yet. So I wasn't diagnosed as such or anything, but I'm pretty sure I had it. But anyway, so that was a kind of a rough beginning. And then COVID hit and everything shut down in mid-March. So I had a few clients, but obviously it was pretty slow going for the following 6 months. All the time that I didn't spend coaching, I spent recording podcasts, creating videos, creating content, which allowed me then fast forward to October, November of last year, so about 6 months ago, of actually having a solid client base in personal training. And since the gyms were shut, I did a lot of in-home personal training, and still work with a bunch of distance clients. And since then, it's kind of I wouldn't say exploded, but it just keeps building month to month. And at this point, I'm fully saturated with clients, which is a good problem to have. So I can't take anybody else on. My week is as full as my wife will allow it to be, because she helps me a lot with time management, which I'm really bad at. And if it was just me, I would probably work 15 hours a day every day of the week. So it's good to have someone to kind of pull the reins a little bit and put me back in my place. And so the rugby kind of just picked up again about a month ago. I haven't been back with the team yet, simply because there's no competition lined up at this point. And with my busy schedule, I just can't make the time at this point to go down to the field. The guys just need to, honestly, I really think that, and coaches agree, they need to just play ball and have fun for a little bit. They haven't touched the ball in 6 months. So, layering fitness on them right away is probably not the smartest approach. So that's kind of where things have been. Busy as always with the podcast recordings, the videos, and all my research on the side. And it's been good, man. I've been lucky that I was able to essentially grow my business during that time and get to the point where I am today, where things are good, and things are looking up for the future as well. So I couldn't be more thankful of everything that's happened in the last year. And I know it's not been a super easy time for everybody. So always keeping that in mind, obviously.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Well, congratulations on all that. That's really cool. And it's like,
Thanks, man.
It's one of those things where I feel the same, and I've actually struggled a little bit with guilt, because it's one of those things where, like, because of what's happened, because people have lost gym access, a lot of them are looking for a remote coach, and they come back so much better, and they all of that stuff pays off. But I'm here feeling a little bit guilty, because I'm like, well, this has been horrific for a lot of people being furloughed and whatnot, and I'm here and my business is actually growing. And I think it's because people have come to the point where it's been almost like a ruthless reorganization of their priorities. Like, like if there's no random stores open, you can't go buy random stuff. You've got to really figure out what's important to you. Or if you've got no money, you've got to figure out what's more important to you. All this stuff has been huge. And then you see, like, if your business is able to grow during this time, then that's surely only a good thing, because that means that this is a thing that people really do want, even in times of, a global pandemic where people are struggling.
True. Yeah, I agreed.
So you said that your guys have only just got back to playing and just throwing a ball around. I'm assuming that's sort of a mental approach, and that's sort of thing I've been thinking with the guys that I'm in charge of, is like, just get guys back together, no pressure, just get them back running. Because for every 2 people that there have been that have just been smashing 5Ks and been doing like wads on their own every single morning, there's probably 20 people that have just been doing nothing on the couch. And fair enough, it's been a struggle. So getting them back playing is just
absolutely
a thing, Yeah. Did you have?
Yeah, it definitely is. And
go ahead. We're on a bit of a lag, but
go for it. No, I was literally just going to bounce off of this and really reiterate what you just said, which, just let the guys play. Performance will come when performance has to come, but health and mental health at this point is super important, as you said. And I think, just, it's like letting the cows out in the paddock. Just let them run around. Don't start putting them in lines and shit. Just let them be happy for a bit.
Yeah, they're not going to hurt themselves. Yeah, it's weird. I don't know if you've seen the return to play protocols that that the English RFU have sort of released, where it's like, it's properly mandated where you're not allowed to do contact until this point. You're not allowed to you have to do this and this and this. And it's strange, because I think most clubs are just ignoring it, because they're like, look, we've not played rugby for a year. We want to just do something that we enjoy, please. Like, spent so long being controlled, and I'm here repeating the same thing, you know.
I guess besides to that, I definitely think that jumping back into contact on day one or week 2 or week 3 is downright stupid, because the potential of injury is just so high. The more I think about it, contact is the most intense thing that happens on the field. Forget sprinting, forget a scrum, like, which is contact in a way, but it's structured. Like actual contact, you're behaving. It's almost like you're behaving with an unmanageable, and especially as someone who doesn't want to be managed, and they're behaving in a let's say ballistic way, and you have to do the same reciprocally and respond to that. Just the intensity and the strain that goes with this is tremendous. And so I really do think that a smart plan to return to contact is absolutely fundamental. But then again, like you said, there's probably a middle ground to be found as to how that's achieved, and obviously with the different levels and different schedules in mind. But yeah, it's tough, man. It's never happened before, so a lot of people just don't know what to do and how to do it. And yeah, again, going back to it's not an easy time, so we got to do what we know.
Yeah. And on that injury element, it's just like, especially when you consider, and a lot of people forget this, particularly when you talk about tackling and rucking and stuff. That's all like high skill stuff. And if you haven't done a skill for well over a year, and you just go straight back into it, like it's not good. Like, people forget that, especially with the rugby mentality, it was always, if you don't win a ruck, it's because you didn't hit it hard enough. So you've just got to take a bigger run up and hit it as hard as you can. It was never like, here's a perfect technique to pick this guy's arm up so he can pivot off I never got taught that. Like, not by a coach at least, It was always just, why didn't you win that ruck? You've got to hit it harder. You've got to you've got to want it more. So that's what you would go to. And that's what I'm worried about a lot of people going to, like, having had a year off. And so that actually leads me
Definitely
into the question. Sorry, before we go, we'll just go straight into the question.
Go.
Guys that are getting back into rugby, like, that listen to this, they're finally seeing this light at the end of the tunnel, but they want to sort of take things a little bit into their own hands. What are some big mistakes that you think and foresee those guys sort of making?
I definitely think too much too soon is the biggest threat. And you said, you spoke to Keir, so he's been kind of pretty big on that with the return to play is, do less than doing a lot less. It's always going to be better to do a lot less than is possible than to do just a little bit too much. As in, just cut the, whatever you think you should start with, cut it right in half. And if the first session feels like you did nothing, then you're probably right where you need to be. I remember when we returned to play after the whatever it was, 4 months off last year. It was the first 2 or 3 sessions. It was literally planned that the guys were going to get off the pitch and barely sweat at all. We didn't wear cleats. We just used runners because you can't step the same way without the grip on the floor or on the grass. And so just tried to put all those little things in place so that we could have just a really smooth return to volume and intensity. And so I think that's the biggest thing to keep in mind is, whatever you think is good to do on day one, do half of that and be happy that you can, walk away to train another day kind of thing. Yeah. So take those 3 weeks to build a solid foundation of work without overdoing it, and only then start, pushing. Because if you did it before, if you've kept training and all those things, then it's good. Just be conscious of, if you haven't, really sprinted in over 2 weeks, then you're going to want to take a few steps to get back to this before you go full out, on day one of rugby. But again, I think really contact is where the most damage can happen. And so that's got to be a thoughtful approach as well. Crawling, all kinds of crawling. That is, just go crawling exercises on YouTube if you don't know what you're doing, and then find a bunch that look fun and do those. That's going to be a great starting point for, core stability, upper body preparation, shoulders, all that stuff. And then obviously you need to move to wrestling, close wrestling with another person before you can move to full on contact with, high speed running plus big impacts. I would always follow that kind of 3-phase or 3-step approach to contact, and give yourself at least I'd say a couple weeks within each step before you actually go into full contact. So you want to have a few weeks before you're back to full play, and you're just going to be better off doing it that way. It's better to take an extra couple weeks than to cut it just a little too short and then get injured, and that ruins your next 2 months. So I think caution is probably just the one word to remember.
Yeah, I have two thoughts on that. The first one is about that contact situation. It's like that's the exact model that I follow, and that was the model. Funny enough, I was following January last year when we were coming back from a Christmas break, ready to play again, and then it all happened. I remember just being so disappointed because it actually came together really well for the first time. Everything went perfectly, no injuries. Like, we looked better in contact situations than before because we relearned the skill, and then it ballsed up. And then the other thing I was thinking was within that sort of idea of like progressing is that, like, we've all been there. And I think it's a definite trait of a lot of macho rugby players and guys that they're sort of afraid of not doing enough. Like, you're always like, there's never a fear of, oh, I've done too much and I fucked myself. But the fear is always there of, oh, I've not done enough. I've trained like a wuss. Like, I can't believe we've left the session, and I'm not even really sweating that much, or whatever it is. I had plenty more left in the tank. And I always have a time sort of explaining to people, like, yeah, that's the point. Like, you're supposed to, like, you're never getting better with just one session. Like, one session really doesn't really matter. You're not getting better because of one session. Because if that was the case, like, that would, the one perfect session would be all you need. No, it's a case of several weeks of this stuff. So why not just get yourself better for the weeks that are to come? And that's got to be, if you're a lot of coaches don't see it like that way as well. So even if you're a player listening to this or watching this, like, that's got to be on you. You've got to really manage yourself, in my opinion.
Yeah, I really believe so. And it's funny, maybe it's just me having been removed from, the rugby environment for, what is it now, 6-7 months. Mm-hmm. But what comes to mind when you talk about all this is just, it's almost, in my mind, it's almost, pejorative. I don't want it to, I don't want, it's not the intention that I have with it in saying that, but I really think it's I guess amateur is the nice word and stupid is the not so nice word to still think like that. I guess maybe the more I advance, the more I just have no patience for this type of thinking. Yeah. Because I really just see it as, that's
looking for shortcuts.
That's how it's such a shortcut, and we just know so much better.
Yeah.
There's just way too much information out there to explain why you need to actually progress things intelligently and thoughtfully, and not just run your head into a brick wall day in and day out. And I really, and I mean that in the best of ways, in the sense that the last thing I want is for people to get hurt. The last thing I want is for people to not be able to play the game that they love. Mm-hmm. But this, like you said, this macho, this egotistical mentality that is still, rampant in our rugby world. I don't know how we can, take it down and tackle it, but it's just got to be put there loud and clear, because, and I know, Sam Portland talks a lot about the mental aspect of the game as well, and how those things are not spoken about enough. I feel like all those things that are known but maybe not spoken about enough need to just be brought to light more, because it's just hurting way too many people that shouldn't be in those positions, and it's really not bringing anything to the table. So I do think that we as a community, the rugby community, whether it's amateur or above, we need to just be a little more thoughtful about how we do things, because in the end we all want the same thing, is to play the game and have fun.
Yeah.
And taking shortcuts that are going to potentially injure people, just because we've done it that way, or just because you have to show a certain side of yourself, or I don't know what the other potential explanations are. I just have a very hard time with it.
Yeah, I think on that showing another side of yourself, I think there's something to that. Again, probably because of social media, because we get a lot of people that they'll see a really tough session, right? Like England rugby's like a perfect example of this, because, but even just CrossFit in general and the training community in general, like we love to like that's the stuff that's popular on social media and on YouTube and whatnot. We've already discussed like how to get like the things that are popular and whatnot. It's always like that intense stuff, like the really balls to the wall sessions. They're the ones that always make the TV cuts. They're the ones that make the YouTube videos. They're the ones that make that whatever screen is on Instagram, like the real tough stuff. But that's because it's done by the top 0.01% of players that have earned the right to do that stuff. And we look at it and we're like, oh, I'll give that a go, not knowing that it's going to give a complete different response. Like even if like it gives a good response at all, if you're actually capable of doing stuff like that, I think especially with conditioning, it's something that people like to do. It's not you don't see like the world powerlifting record gets set and then you go, oh, I'm gonna have a go at seeing if I can do that. Like no, you can't pick it off the ground. You just can't do it. But conditioning, for some reason, people think, oh, let's see, 5-minute mile, I'm gonna try it. Like, what? Why? Like, it's so weird. Yeah. I thought I talked myself into it, then I realized that actually it is stupid. Why? But then, so in your opinion, like we get, perfect example. This is one that we did speak about last time. Was the I've already forgotten the name. The Bronco test, right? Mm-hmm. People love this, and they love saying this because they love thinking that this is an anaerobic test which proves rugby. And we're not gonna. There's enough on the Rugby Muscle YouTube channel shitting on the Bronco as a test, but why do people think that like anaerobic or rugby is anaerobic, should I say? And more to the point, I think something that I'd like you to answer is like, is something being solely anaerobic even a thing?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I guess you've watched some of my content if you're asking those questions. So everybody or people who are interested in conditioning probably dug into energy systems, and we have three energy systems that kind of are their job is to recycle the ATP, so the energy currency of the body, so that we can just keep doing work essentially. Mm-hmm. And so the first one is the phosphocreatine system, and it was always thought that, or for a long time, it was thought that this system worked for the first 8 to 10 seconds in any effort, and that it had a high return in terms of energy yield. So that's where your short sprints or heavy lifts, all those things happen in that short time frame, and so that was an aerobic lack effort. So anaerobic meaning there is no it's in the absence of oxygen, and alactic meaning it's happening in the absence of lactate. Lactate being the byproduct of glycolysis, so the breakdown of sugar. That brings it to the second energy system, which is glycolysis. And so the breakdown of sugar brings in a certain amount of ATP, but it kind of works more on the midterm in terms of time duration. So people talk about up to 90 or 90 seconds or 120 seconds. This is when glycolytic activity is at the highest. And then at the end, you have the aerobic system, so cellular respiration using oxygen, and that's going to power the longer effort, the endurance type stuff. And so for a long time, those three energy systems were kind of sequenced in that way in time, were thought to be used in a sequential manner in time during an effort. So for the first 10 seconds, using one, and then you'll be using number two, and then later on, or if you're doing like an endurance, a longer thing, you'll be using number three. And then some people started saying, well, no, they kind of work all together, but in different proportions. And I think what really broke that camel's back is just the advance of technology in the last 20 years and what research has been able to show. Essentially what seems to be going on, or what we understand to be going on at this point in time, because again, as technology advances, what we currently understand is probably going to be, demonstrated as being wrong. So what I'm talking about now is just what has been found in the research in the last 10, 20 years, and still largely ignored by all the textbooks, in the sense that they've kept that kind of sequential organization of those energy systems in time, without thinking of looking at the updated literature on the question. But to speak very simply, the phosphocreatine system absolutely exists. If you look at the equation on paper, there is no oxygen involved in that process. But the crux here is that nothing works in isolation in the body. It's a system of systems. It's an integrated system. And it turns out that the phosphocreatine system is tightly coupled to the aerobic machinery. So PCR, phosphocreatine, and oxygen go hand in hand. And as oxygen levels go down, phosphocreatine levels go down, or vice versa. So those two kind of work together. They don't work independently. They work together, and more importantly, they work both from this first instant of effort. And you can see that with technologies such as the Moxie or the Moxie monitor, which is a NIRS device, NIRS for infrared spectroscopy. Very simply, if you put a pulse oximeter on the end of your finger, which you see at the hospital, for example, and it shows you, usually if you're in good health, between 97 and 99%. The acronym is SpO2, which is peripheral saturation in oxygen. So that's out of 100 units of hemoglobin, which is what carries oxygen in our blood. Out of 100 units, how many of those units carry oxygen? And in your arteries, so the blood that's just gone through your lungs and got oxygenated and comes out of your heart, that should always be between 97 and 99%. So you essentially have a full tank when that blood gets to the muscle, and then the muscle itself is going to use up the oxygen to power muscular contractions, to maintain cellular structure, to make new structures. And so essentially that oxygen gets used right away. And with that NIRS device I was talking about, it's the equivalent of the SpO2 measure, but it measures that in the capillaries of the muscle. So you can essentially see how much oxygen you're using given a quantity that you have available. So again, out of 100 units, how many are you using and how many are available? And when you use one of those devices, it kind of throws the old model out the window right away, because whether you're doing a squat, whether you're starting to run at a slow pace, whether you're starting to run at a fast pace, oxygen gets used right away. First instance, oxygen levels go down, and that's really kind of the central piece here. There is no anaerobic. Going back to your initial question, nothing happens in the absence of oxygen. Again, sure, you can say that the phosphocreatine mechanism itself happens in the absence of oxygen, but the body at large doesn't work like that. And so those things happen together. So I really do believe that it is time to retire terms such as anaerobic for purposes of for training purposes. Same with alactic. I think that, people say, yeah, but, you're taking away my technical terms that I like, I know, and I use, and people understand. Your rugby players and your athletes don't need to know that an effort, what energy system effort uses. I don't think you should have to go to those extents and explaining physiology to your athletes to talk about training. You can talk about a short sprint. You can talk about a high intensity, short duration effort. That would absolutely fit the bill and be correct without having to use terms such as aerobic, lactate. I don't know if you want me to go into the lactate side of things, but I won't go too far, but essentially you're producing lactate right now sitting down. Lactate is being produced, it is being used, it is being shuttled to your body as well. Lactate is a fuel source for the body. We oxidize lactate to create ATP to regenerate our glycogen stores. It is not a bad guy. It is not what makes you what induces pain from training. That's probably just coming from hydrogen ions, and even then, we're not really sure about what creates all this. There's a lot of feedback loops in the body between the brain and the muscles and every other system. So it's actually not very well understood at all at this point. But absolutely, for sure, a good thing to remember is that everything works with oxygen at all times, and there is always lactate circulating in your body, and that is not something that should be avoided per se. I hope I answered your question. Okay.
I think you did. I think you knocked it out of the park, mate. It's funny because I have this problem, or I don't use alactic as much as I just say high intensity when I'm talking training, because high intensity people think, well, high intensity. But if I'm saying high, they know that they've got to use all out for for the time frame, which is usually 5-7 seconds or so. And I just did that because I thought that's going to be much easier for guys to understand. So I'm glad I don't have to re-update all of my stuff based on that information you've just given me. But it is fascinating. I do think I've always thought intrinsically like something similar. Like it's not to have it completely blown apart like that is amazing. But I've always thought it's just like you do a 100-meter sprint and maybe because that was what I'll always remember my PE lesson when I was probably 15 years old. They said they talked about the aerobic system and the anaerobic, and they showed 100-meter sprinters, and they show when they go in a slow-mo of the faces and they're moving slowly around and they don't breathe, and they're like, look, it just shows you like that when you're sprinting you don't need oxygen. And then I thought, but when I sprint I'm breathing as heavily as I can. So what gives? Like,
especially after.
Yeah. And then that was the point I always make is to rugby players is like, you can do a high effort and you use the quote unquote anaerobic system. But what do you do immediately as soon as you stop? Breathe really heavily, So it's always working sort of, I guess, working on the lungs and whatnot is something that's, or the aerobic system, as I'm just going to continue to call it, and I feel now guilty using that word. I still
say aerobic work.
Yeah.
It's still something that I use, and then I try to switch to endurance but again, it is I don't know if that one needs to be thrown out the window as much as the other ones.
Yes, I understand.
Because but at the same time, the argument could be that, well, everything's aerobic, so when you say aerobic, what do you really mean? Blah blah blah. But so I guess that's for me. I guess I'm still going to give myself and everybody a bit more leeway on the aerobic training side of things.
I think if you're working aerobic, like if you're saying this is aerobic work, you're specifically doing it to work, the ability, I guess the qualities that will produce a better, aerobic system. Again, you get
oxygen delivery.
Oxygen delivery system, perfect. Circulatory system that will allow the body to consistently pump blood around the body and continue to fuel itself. And so, yes, I think that is what we've agreed upon before. I believe that is going to be the primary method that guys are going to use to give themselves energy in a game of rugby, for example, as well. Do you foresee this being like any issues with the way that guys train, particularly like strong guys, when they're trying to do conditioning work, like along the lines of trying to keep things aerobic?
I think that's the tricky bit is the more I learn, the more I'm having a very hard time generalizing for different either people or levels or in the sense that everybody's needs are good from that standpoint and what they need to do. I still do think that the long, slow distance kind of work is important if you've never done it. There does come a point where you get diminishing returns, obviously, and you don't have to do 3 sessions a week like this for the rest of your life, but you need a base. And how do you assess that? Again, now I've been learning about use the Mox monitor to do some specific testing protocols to determine what the person's profile looks like on the physiological side, and then what to give them as training interventions based on this. So now I know what a graph looks like when I test someone, and I can say, oh, they don't have a base. They need to do some, what in the endurance word you would call zone 2. So some steady state stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So anywhere from 45 to 90 minutes continuous. It could be on different modalities, but usually you're going to want to have that at a low intensity. You should come out of the session feeling like you left a lot on the table. That's a good, it's called quote unquote zone 2 session.
Yeah.
And those are going to be important and beneficial. But again, you don't need to do them all the time. I think in the beginning of preseason is a good time to do it. But then on the other side, now what I've been learning about recently is, we think about adaptations, and we think about the slow type of work that is good for all things endurance. But we also have to think about, fiber types, because to speak very, very simply here, you have fast twitch fibers and slow twitch fibers. And depending on the effort that's produced and the force that's required, for example, for just a jog, you're going to primarily recruit smaller, lower threshold motor neurons. So the neuron itself, that is, and then the fiber type that is attached to it, is only going to be recruited if essentially the bigger the motor unit, the more force needs to be produced in order to recruit that unit. Mm-hmm. And in a practical, to make that practical, when you do low intensity, slow endurance work, you're primarily targeting your slow twitch fibers. And then obviously when you're sprinting, you're going to be recruiting the fast twitch fibers. And so that's got to be taken into consideration, because your base endurance work does not affect the high threshold motor units. And so all the stuff that you're using for high power, think about anybody in the scrum, anybody doing a sprint, so everybody on the rugby pitch, those fibers, if you don't produce enough force, if you don't generate enough force, you're not going to be recruiting them. And so they're not going to be getting any adaptations from the training. Right. So if you only do the slow stuff, you're only going to, recruit the lower threshold motor neurons, the slow twitch fibers, and those are going to adapt. But that's far from being the only thing that you need. That's the base that you need. But you also need your fast twitch fibers to be endurant and being able to utilize oxygen well, and being able to produce power continually and recycle and reload and go again. Right. That's the game of rugby. It's intermittent high intensity. You do a high intensity effort, whether it's a scrum or let's say a scrum, and then you take a little break, and then you do a sprint, and then you do a jog, and then it's all up and down. And so I think considering that in conditioning in general is very important. You need the way I see it now, maybe that is different than I did even just a few months back, is that yes, you need your sprint work, your pure sprint work, but that's going to be almost more on the technical side and the neural aspect of things, where you're developing the ability of your nervous system to generate high outputs. And you're obviously learning to run better, because we all know how important that is in order to prevent injuries or limit the potential for injuries. Can't prevent injuries, limit the potential for injuries, and increase your efficiency and make sure your top speed is as high as it can be. But then you also need to condition those fast twitch fibers so that they have the ability to repeat sprints during a game. So I think some kind of intermittent high intensity running, I think tempo runs are kind of in the middle. I guess you could go intensive tempo runs, which are a little more intense and a little shorter in duration with a bit more rest, something like this, or even some kind. I don't like the repeat sprints itself, like the protocols that are out there, all those things. It's just a bloodbath after 3 reps. It's not the point.
Do you want to give me an example of like rest times and rep ranges or rep durations and stuff that people do for those ones, just for examples?
Off the top of my head, I know what's his name? Great guy, Justin Kewen, I think it was his name. I had him on the podcast, and he did a great summary of all the research that has been done so far on repeat sprintability. And the conclusion of that was essentially that the higher your top speed, the better your repeat sprintability. And people with the highest outputs or the highest top speeds have the biggest decrement in speed from rep to rep. So if your first rep is at 32 kilometers per hour, then your next one is at 30, and then your next one is at 28, and then your next one is at 26. Granted, if the rest times are short enough, where a slower person that has a top speed of say 25 kilometers per hour, well, they might be able to do then 24, and then 23, and then 22. So on paper, it looks like, oh, they're maintaining their top speed better. Yeah, but they were just slow as fuck to begin with. So it doesn't. Yeah. It doesn't really matter. Yeah. But to answer your question, again, I don't have the specifics in mind, but it was something of the order of, if you do 10-second all out or 6-second all out, and then a 20 or 25-second rest, which is very short. And so they use those protocols to test repeat sprintability, which in my opinion is a misnomer and just a bad application of whatever people were trying to do with it. So I would probably orient people with, again, some kind of, I like the tempo run format that Keir shared on his presentation on Strength Coach Network. I think that was a really good way of, first you build volume, then you densify the work with less rest, and then you add some intensity in there at the end as a kind of a three-step phases. And doing something like this, but with, again, slightly shorter distances and maybe rest times, and building that over time. So, just basic conditioning, and that could be done in an isolated format that can, and more, in my opinion, that's something that I've kind of shifted sides on quite a bit in recent times, is I think, especially at the amateur level, a lot more integrated work with rugby. So conditioning work in, small-sided games and all those things. The only problem with that is that it requires either having a rugby coach that understands strength and conditioning and understands how to structure and progress those things, or you need a very good communication and collaboration between the strength and conditioning coach and the rugby coach in order to plan those sessions, so that the content and the structure and the rest and work to rest ratios and the rules and the intensities and the number of people and the size of the field and all those things makes sense from a progression perspective. And this is hard to do. This is probably one of the things that I look forward the most going back to rugby in the next few months, is sitting down with the coaches and be like, okay, I want to work with you guys. I want us to work together to build a really, really robust progression in our conditioning while always having a ball in hand. And there is going to be time for isolated work on, for example, sprint work and contact prep and those things. But I really feel more and more that the conditioning can be done in an integrated fashion, but it is hard to do really well, I think.
It is. It's so hard. It's not hard to do, but it's so much harder to do it. Like, if you just take a little bit of time to set out and prepare it properly, like the gains that you can be made for the exact same time investment, and probably even less energy investment, like, comes back so much. And I couldn't agree with you more. And I'm glad that you said all that stuff about the high-end sprints, because that's almost like exactly how I lay out my training. I've been influenced a lot recently because I reread The Hybrid Athlete from Alex Viada, and that concurrent style of training is something that I really enjoy and get down with my guys. It's like, work your low system because you said, the disadvantage is that you don't work, the fast twitch fibers of the muscle. We're not really concerned with any fibers of the muscle at that point when we're working that zone 2 stuff. We're just working that circulatory system. I've already learned to not say aerobic. To get energy around the body, to help that heart be more efficient. And then we become strong, powerful, and fast as fuck, so that we can continue, like, our high end is higher. the problem is that most people do either one of those things. They never do them both at the same time. They either get really aerobically fit and really aerobically strong. You know, your endurance athletes or people with an endurance bias in rugby, but their top end is just not high enough to really even get to the level to compete in a ruck or to go round a person in, you know, if they're on the wing. Likewise, you've got the people on the other end of the spectrum. You know, you've got your really strong meathead athletes that are really strong, but because they're such, you know, they can work at, you know, a real high level for a few reps, but then it becomes, because their aerobic system's so weak, everything becomes so fatiguing because they can't get an aerobic system to support any level because they're so absolutely strong. So then they end up becoming almost just as weak or as useless as the guys that don't have that strength because their energy systems sort of failed them. And it's something that is an interesting sort of, and this is why I find rugby strength and conditioning like so fascinating. It is such an interesting problem to solve, you know?
It definitely is, and there's so many things at play, and I really don't think it has to be as complicated as the conversation we're having now.
No.
It's very much possible to make things a lot simpler. Again, because it's important to make things as simple as possible. But like you said, working at both ends of that spectrum, on the endurance side, on the fundamental endurance side, if we want to call it that, and then on the high intensity stuff in a repeated fashion. That way we can make sure that all the stuff, to speak simply, all the stuff that we're going to need and use during the game is developed as well as it can be developed. Essentially, leave no stone unturned. That's one thing which is absolutely basic when you think about it. But before doing the physiological testing that I'm doing now, is like, just get a 3-month training history. What are they doing? What are they not doing? How much endurance work are they doing? What's the RPE when they're doing said endurance work? So when guys come back and say, "Oh, I do endurance 2 or 3 times a week with an RPE of 8 or 9," it's like, dude, this is not endurance work. This is just like a beat down. And so then you can just look at their profile after the test and be like, "Yep, you need that stuff because you don't do that stuff."
Yeah.
And so
Tabata after a heavy strength workout is not endurance.
no, and so you need your fundamental endurance work, you need your strength work, you need your speed work, and you also need some type of interval training, hit style or CrossFit style, whatever you want to put in that box. But I think all those things are important, and so if you do all of those, then you can check those boxes and move on. So really, if you hit the fundamental endurance, if you hit the speed work, and if you hit some kind of middle ground with some intensity and with different types of efforts, especially for rugby, where we're talking upper body, lower body, emphasizing different parts of the game, you want to have the ability to shuttle that blood around and use your legs and then use your upper body. And if you never work on those kind of things, and I've said it, I've always thought that, and I probably would give a bit more leeway now than I used to when I'm asked about CrossFit for rugby. I think in the off season it might be a good one of those middle ground things where you do a couple good sessions a week. That might be a good thing. In season, I still think that it's a bad idea altogether because of the demands of rugby itself. Even at the amateur level, you're going to be beat up. And if you beat up twice in training and once in a game, and you go get yourself beaten up at the gym again, it's just a great recipe to get injured. But there, I do think there is a place for such training. Again, it's all about dose and it's all about timing. But I think if you hit those 3 things, those 3 big boxes, I think you're going to be pretty good.
The other thing I thought about when you said that is that I've come to believe more than ever that CrossFit is an aerobic sport, and it's just what we spoke about again. Like, if you're a good, like Matt Fraser, and people have watched enough podcasts over recent months where I've spoken about him. He's the best CrossFit, or he was, he retired or whatever, but he was like ultimate CrossFit athlete because he had that top end. He's that sprinter that's sprinting 30 kilometers an hour, so that when he's doing a WOD, like, he's moving so perfectly because he's got so much strength potential in those movements because he used to be a really strong weightlifter. And so he's got those fundamentals. And then therefore, when he's repping out 50 reps of 135, like, that's nothing for him because his top end is so much. and then he's got that aerobic work to continue to fuel it. So it's still, it's still a very similar sport in actuality to rugby. So I definitely understand. I'm still not sure if I can tolerate recommending people to do CrossFit just because of the name, and because I go back on a lot of things that I say, but I've spent a lot of time shitting on CrossFit that I've got a lot of investment in that bank. I'm not
It's
sure.
good.
If I'm
It's
gonna
good to
tell people
recognize
go
your
do
own bias.
CrossFit. Yeah, for sure. But I want to ask you along the lines of what you were talking about there, about how the team training requires a lot of, hopefully a really good coach that understands S&C or a really well integrated system. But you've also said that you coach guys individually online as well. So what do you think are some key differences there when you're looking at someone that you were conditioning online or just an individual where you're in charge of their conditioning versus that regime where you're part of a system looking from the top down as a coach?
It would probably be a very similar approach, but just in a much more targeted way. And now having the means that I have to test people, I keep going back to that, but it's kind of what I do a lot of right now. I would probably do that. I would test the people that I work with and figure out what they actually need at this point in time, which is probably going to be different than what they needed 2 months ago and different from what they're going to need 2 months down the line. And then give them work to do on those things, quantify progress from whether it's a heart rate standpoint or some performance metric. It could be a Bronco, even though I don't care for the Bronco itself as a metric of conditioning for rugby. But whatever output based test you can find, whether it's close to rugby or not, is in my opinion completely irrelevant, because none of the tests are anywhere remotely close to the demands of rugby. And that's actually a little experiment that I'm going to be running in the next few months. I've gotten 3 guys from my team, a prop, a flanker, and a back, and I'm going to strap them up with the technology and get them to run all those different popular tests, and then just put the Moxies on them as well when they go and play actual rugby. Nice. And then just look at the graphs from the physiological standpoint and be like, okay, let's have a look at all those graphs and all the tests that are said to be rugby tests, and let's actually look if there's any similarities and what's going on under the hood between those tests and in a game of rugby. I can already tell you that there is none.
Yeah. Oh, you're on the right podcast when it comes to shitting on tests for rugby. I'm telling you, I somehow I feel like this is not me. This is the first time I haven't shoehorned it in myself, but usually I do spend a lot of time saying, like, what are we doing? Like, why are we doing these stupid tests?
Yeah, and I do think that a test, and again, I really don't care which one, is a good way just to quantify your progress on a given metric that you're trying to improve. I think the stuff that I've been doing is more useful in a pure endurance context or in a CrossFit context, because it is a step test that resembles what you might do with a VO2 test, but it does give you a good way to quantify progress over time, in the sense that you could just look at the average heart rate on the last minute of each step. Say you're running for 4 minutes at 6 kilometers per hour, and then you take a minute break, and then you do another 4 minutes at 9 kilometers per hour, and you keep going like that, plus 3 kilometers per hour on every step. You look at the last minute of each one of those, you take your average heart rate, and then after a month of training, whatever you were trying to work, you do the same steps again, and you look at your heart rate and all those different running speeds. Were you able to decrease your heart rate for a given output? That would mean that you've actually made quantifiable progress, because whether you want to talk about your heart being more efficient or just yourself being more efficient, or other parts of your body working harder so that the heart doesn't have to do all the work, no matter which way you spin it, if you can over time see a decrease in heart rate for a given output, you're winning. And so I think that having some kind of barometer to quantify progress is important. And but again, going back to your original question, I wouldn't approach it any differently. I would just assess the individual and what their actual needs are on the moment, and then program based on that.
Yeah, it's the other issue I found. I don't know if you coach many, particularly rugby players online, but the one I found is you're like if you're in like, because I coach a rugby team as well. Like, I'm in complete control of those sessions, but in the rugby team, I'm not in control of the rest of the week. Whereas it's the complete opposite when I'm coaching online. I'm in control of the whole week in terms of programming what they're doing, but I've got no control over those two sessions. And they're the complete opposite problems, because those two sessions can be absolutely fucking brutal if their coach wants them to be. So kind of got no choice but to program those as high-low, high days, you know?
Yeah, that's usually the approach I'll take as well. Is just, if you're in season, if there's rugby training, if there's games, in an amateur context, that's usually what you're going to get: 2 trainings in a game, and those have to be considered as your high intensity days. And even if the coaches say it's going to be an easy one, because again, you never know.
Yeah.
You also don't know if your definition of intensity is the same as theirs, which is fine. And I think that's also maybe maybe another conversation, but an opportunity for us to not educate. I don't like the word educate, but inform the coaches, and for there to be that transfer of knowledge and information from the technical tactical coaches to and from the strength and conditioning coach or coaches. And I think, I mean, again, you look at the most successful programs anywhere you want, they have integrated all those things together. It's not he does his thing on the left and I do my thing on the right. It's no, we're all working together towards the same end. How can we optimize, so that we can all get to the highest level together with the least amount of potential for injury and in the least amount of time. And so in the end, again, we talk about integration in the body, and if we think about it in that way, well, we're probably a little bit closer to the quote unquote truth. And I think it's the same for any organization with distinct coaches or distinct categories of things that you're going to be working on. At the end of the day, on the rugby field, it doesn't fucking matter if one coach did this and one coach did that. It all comes together. It's all integrated. And so the more we can move towards that way of thinking, the better off we're going to be in the long term.
For sure. And then, couldn't agree more. You see it in like every sort of field and every system, everything. Integration has to happen. The better things integrate, because nothing, not even the anaerobic system or the aerobic system, nothing happens in a fucking vacuum. And so the better we can sort of treat, that's going back to even when people say, I didn't have an intense session. That's good, because that means that the next session can be so much better because of it. That no session happens in a vacuum. Nothing happens in a vacuum. And so the better everything can be integrated, the better progress we can all make. And that's what we're trying for.
Exactly.
For sure. Okay, I've got 3 last questions, so just enough so that you can, you can finally. I've already made you wolf down your dinner. You've already told me that you're committing as much time as the missus allowed you. So I don't want to be on her bad side. So
I'm here, man. I'm here. No problem.
I've got 3 questions. Just the first one. I say these are 3 quick fire questions, but this first one sometimes digs a little deep. But it is what does strength and conditioning, and we can look at rugby strength and conditioning organisations and stuff. But what does strength and conditioning look like in 20 years' time, and will you still be involved?
Whew, that is a fantastic question. So strength and conditioning in general, I really hope that I will still be involved, because it's a job for me, but it's an absolute passion as well. I mean, I said it before, and you said it as well. Like I spend every waking hour of my life thinking about those things, whether I want it or not. It's the first thing I think about when I wake up in the morning, and it's the last thing I think about when I go to bed.
Definitely don't let the missus listen to this episode, okay?
She's okay. She knows. Good. in 20 years, I'm still going to be involved. Yes, fingers crossed, and knock on wood. What is it going to look like? I really think it goes back to what we just talked about. It's going to be a lot less isolated than it currently is. We always talk about sport performance, and Kier and others talk about this as well, how young of a field it is compared to all the other lines of work that exist and professions and whatnot. There's a lot of growing still to do. So I do see everything moving towards more integration and more communication between the different parties at play. And again, so that's gonna what is it gonna mean? It's gonna mean having a common vocabulary between all the different coaches and all the different people that have a part to play, whether it's on the rehab side, on the mental side, on the logistics side, technical, tactical, physical, mental. I mean, those are the basics, but having a common vocabulary, being able to exchange, being able to put things together in common and work through that instead of, again, each having your own, each person or each coach having their own little corner in which they do things. I just pictured the room that I'm in, and it's as if now there's a coach in each corner. There's a technical coach, a tactical coach, a physical coach, and a mental coach, and they're all facing their respective corners. We need to bring everybody in the middle of the room around a little table and have a conversation.
Except less evil, but yeah.
less big tech evil, but we do need to talk more. I think that's where things are going.
And there's a reason that the big corporations and all big successful corporations are actually moving to that type of model, so it's only hopefully in 20 years time sport has sort of caught up with that. Who knows?
I hope so.
Next one, what's one song everyone should include on their gym playlist?
I saw that one on your email, and I was actually just pulling up my iTunes to see what I've been listening to recently. I would say Break the Cycle, Fire from the Gods. That's nice. A good one. It starts okay, and then it ends really well. It's kind of a ramping up kind of song, but it just came across here. And
that's one that you're not listening to on a Zone 2 session, right?
Not a Zone 2 session.
And then how can listeners get in touch and follow more of your podcast, your YouTube, particularly as you do you have a bilingual YouTube, so
I do. So Upside Strength on YouTube, on Instagram, on Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok, Twitter, wherever you want to find me, I'm there. Upside Strength podcast as well, both, like you said, in French and English. I try, when I do something that I like, a presentation that I've been making some of those for my YouTube channel, I try to make them in both French and English. Nice. And so if anybody is interested in what I talked about today, you could definitely check out a few of those things. There's a lot of videos, and there's a lot of podcasts, so you can go dig in.
I'm sure they will. All the links will be in the description below, although I've just figured out that like Spotify's description links aren't as good, so I would suggest that you go to YouTube and click on all the links there, and whilst you're there, give it a thumbs up, hit subscribe if you're new. And we'll probably have Sean back on, so pop any questions you want in the comments below. We'd love to hear some feedback. And Sean, thanks for coming on, mate. This has been great.
TJ, second time around, and it was better than the first time. I hope for the listeners as well. I really, really appreciate you having me on for the second time, and always enjoy having a chat with you, man.
Awesome.